Hi, everyone. In this week's module, we're going to talk about some of the additional functions of a kitchen, focusing in on serving and dining. We'll start out looking at kitchen workflow and the various secondary kitchen centers that you could need. All right, before looking closer at serving centers and dining centers in particular. By now, you're probably familiar with the idea of kitchen centers. All right. Each one of these work centers is just an area where a particular task occurs. There's three primary centers, all right? You can call them the sink center, refrigeration center, and the cooking center. All right. But there's many different secondary centers. These can be related to food prep, for example, a baking center, or they can be non-food related. All right. For example, a communications center might have, a telephone and a family calendar. Right. Um, and of course, the ones that we're going to focus on this week are the serving center and the dining center. Each of these secondary centers is kind of an additional or support work zone to those primary three activity centers. And they generally have similar space requirements. The primary centers have a little bit more space needed, maybe 36 inches wide by your typical 18-inch depth. Um, your secondary centers, can be a little bit smaller and go down to maybe 24 inches wide by at least 18 inches deep. Let's talk about your kitchen workflow as somebody moves through kind of the average or typical tasks to preparing a meal. They might gather their ingredients and materials, prepare the ingredients, cook them, serve the meal, and finally do some cleanup. What does that workflow look like as you move through the space? Well, on the left-hand side, we see an example of kind of an idealized kitchen workflow as ingredients and materials move through the kitchen in one direction, right? Maybe the groceries come in from the car. Um, they get put away in the refrigerator, they get cleaned, they get prepped, cooked, and finally served to the table. On the right-hand side is maybe a poor example of kitchen workflow as items have to cross the space of the kitchen multiple times in that typical workflow. Now we know that meals don't get prepared, in an ideal way in every case. But as the designer, we want to at least streamline this idea as much as possible. So now that we've talked about workflow and work centers in general, let's narrow our focus down to serving. Serving is one part of that workflow, and it involves getting the food from the preparation area to the dining area. Right? And this can be done many different ways depending on your user's lifestyle and habits and traditions. For example, the food might be moved from the pots and pans to serving bowls and platters and then brought to the dining table or to a buffet. This is kind of a family dining situation. Or it could be placed on individual plates and then brought to each diner in the dining area. This is a more formal way to do this, all right, and perhaps more like a restaurant. Right? Or it could be left in the pots and pans, and the diners help themselves when they have time or when they're hungry, more of a casual buffet situation. Your beverages can also be served in many different ways. Each glass can be individually prepared and brought to the dining area. Or you can bring the beverages kind of in bulk in pitchers to the table or the buffet area. Or it can be kind of a BYO, bring your own, and everyone can bring or fix their own drink before they sit down at the table. But food and beverages are not the only thing involved in this task of serving the meal. All right. You also need items for preparing the table. This can be dishes, glassware, flatware. The activity involved is setting the table. All right. Table linens, napkins, condiments. It's also important to include the decor items. This could be flowers, candles, etc. So let's summarize all of these design considerations for the serving center. The task involved is getting food from the prep area to the dining area and preparing the table different items for the meal. All right. Your user is going to vary. Check with your client. Sometimes the person serving is the same person cooking. All right, sometimes not. Your main components of a serving center will be some storage for all these different types of items and counter space, very important. Where should the serving center be? You need to consider traffic flow and circulation to the dining room between the dining and the kitchen. All right. And be real careful not to interfere with the food prep workflow. You need a lot of storage for serving center, but sometimes these items are actually stored in other centers. All right, so you need to coordinate where are the dishes, the glassware, the serving pieces, and the linens. Finally, work surfaces are very important in the serving center. Increasing that minimum prep size for other centers can sometimes be the best option for a serving center. Let's take a look at an example. In this floor plan, we have a fairly small L-shaped kitchen, all right, with a island. And there's two different options. Oh, let me also tell you the dining room in this case is kind of off to the right through this pocket door. And there's two different options for serving centers in this kitchen. One is very informal. You can use the end of this island countertop. You can easily see how plates and platters might be staged on this island before heading out into the dining room. Or a little more formally, you could use this section of countertop plus upper cabinets as a serving center. This might be a great place to store your serving center items such as your linens, your serving platters, etc. Okay, in this video, we just talked about secondary kitchen work centers and then specifically the serving center. We'll pause here, put a pin in it, and come back in the next video to talk about different types of serving centers.